Hey everyone, Coach Lori here with another episode of Conversations with Courageous Cancer Warrior. And today I am honored to have Miss Victoria English Martin. So she is a triple negative breast cancer survivor, an integrative nutrition coach, and a recovery coach in training, which I'm so excited to talk about. And also has her own podcast called After the Crisis. Victoria, thank you so much for being here. I'm very excited to have you.
Oh, thanks, Lori. Thanks for having me. It's an honor.
So you have a lot going on. I am so excited for this conversation. Folks, we're going to get into it, but she definitely has a book coming up. But first and foremost, can you tell us a little bit about your cancer journey?
Yes, absolutely. So I am thankfully turning 50 in October, and I'm a mother of four. I've always been very health conscious. I have my degree in dietetics. I've taught Pilates for over 15 years and practiced healthy eating, healthy lifestyle. I started getting my mammograms at the age of 40 as recommended by my doctor. No family history of breast cancer. And I had a clear mammogram in July of 2017. Clear mammogram. They just said, okay, see you next year. And I thought everything was fine. That March of 2018, I did a breast self-exam in the shower after a workout, and it was as if overnight this thing had popped up. It was right, like right around the strap where like under your armpit, like where your bra goes, and it was very palpable, and it just didn't feel right. And I knew immediately something was wrong. I went just a few days later to the doctor, and it was the typical thing you hear about, you're sitting there in your pink robe and they call you in for the mammogram, and you go back to the waiting room and all the other women are leaving and getting their clothes on and going home, and they called me back in again. And then the radiologist came in, and she was looking at it with the ultrasound, and she said, "This is ugly. This is cancer." And it was just like you read about, the room got small. My children, my life flashed before my eyes, thinking of my children getting married and growing up, and what the hell? So they moved very quickly. They biopsied it that day. I got the results the next week. Turns out it was triple negative breast cancer, stage 2B, which if you're familiar with the stages, that's pretty darn dangerous. It was growing like wildfire. It was grade 3. So as miserable as the journey has been, I consider it a blessing that I did find it just in time. I was just a short time away from it turning into stage 4. So I am grateful for that. But I had a very, very difficult journey of treatment. Triple negative is rare and aggressive. And it turns out that I do carry the BRCA1 mutation from my father's side, which is interesting because I have a very large family on my father's side, and no one has had breast cancer.
Wow.
So it never even occurred to me to have a BRCA test. And I hope that will change someday. I hope that it's a standard of care so that women can avoid a lot of this misery. But I had 16 rounds of chemo, a double mastectomy, a full hysterectomy, like 28 rounds of radiation, and then 6 months of oral chemotherapy. And during that time, I developed sepsis at one point. I was in the hospital for 10 days. After I had the tissue expanders put in, I developed cellulitis and was in the hospital for a few more days. It was a tough road. It was a really tough road. But thankfully today I am considered no evidence of disease. Triple negative doesn't have a medication to prevent recurrence, unlike some of the other hormone positive cancers. So we really have to advocate for ourselves and do what we can as far as lifestyle. So I had a healthy lifestyle before, but I work with a naturopath, and I do some alternative things like mistletoe injections. I'm part of the COC protocol, which is the Care Oncology protocol, which repurposes certain common medications, which hopefully block the metabolic pathways in cancer to help lower my risk of recurrence. But I just try to stay present every day, and it's given me a new gratitude for what we have each day, because that's all we have. And I just hope for the best. I'm just over 2 years out from diagnosis, so getting my hair back and starting to get my energy back this summer. So life is good right now.
Yeah, life is good. You, especially after everything that you've gone through, it's just nice to have a break too, right? Like some normalcy. So
It is.
what got you through? Because I mean, oof, that was a lot. So what got you through it? How did you get
Yeah.
through?
Yeah. Well, that kind of brings me to the reason I have a podcast called After the Crisis. I've always been a pretty goal-oriented person,
Mm-hmm.
and my father is a very hardworking man. And I was kind of raised with the attitude that if you put in the work, you can achieve whatever you want. And so I approached cancer with that same mentality, which worked for me, but also ended up working against me in some ways. And I'll tell you about that. So um, when I was diagnosed and they said, okay, you're going to have basically the most rigorous treatment protocol that there is, I was like, that's fine. The more, bring it on. If do I need more chemo? Give me 20 chemos. Like, do whatever you have to do to get rid of this. Take my breasts, take my reproductive organs, take my hair. Because in my mind, I thought, if I do this and I do it perfectly, then the cancer will be gone. It will never come back. And my oncologist still talks about this. They talk about it in the office. I told my oncologist that I said, okay, when I finish my 16th round of chemo, I'm going to do 30 push-ups, because I can do 30 push-ups now, as I'm diagnosed. So at the end of 16 chemos, I'm going to do 30 push-ups. And he was like, okay, you're crazy, but sure. So my 16th chemo came, and the whole staff came into the infusion room, and I did 30 push-ups. So in my mind, which was great, okay, that's all great stuff. But what I realize now is that in my mind, I was attaching that attitude to an outcome. Like I had some control over it. Like if I worked hard enough and did everything right, I would be cancer-free. Well, I finished chemo, and the next procedure was the mastectomy. And I went in, I didn't even grieve the loss of my breasts at that time. I was just sort of like, hey, do whatever you got to do, take them off. Well, when I woke up from surgery, I found out that unfortunately they had found some live cancer in there. And I still had a couple of positive lymph nodes. So they were able to remove the live cancer, and they took out 9 lymph nodes. But it was not the outcome I had hoped for, because with triple negative, if you have what's called a PCR, a pathological complete response, as you know, then your risk of recurrence is lower.
Mm-hmm.
If you don't have a complete response, you stay up in that 30 to 40% recurrence group.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't want to be in that group. So I was devastated when I found that out. And all I remember is finding that out and crying and screaming, and the nurse coming in and injecting something into my IV to knock me out, because I couldn't believe that I didn't have control over this.
Yeah.
So I went through treatment, and during treatment, I do have a strong faith in God, and I definitely leaned into that faith. I understood that by my being diagnosed with BRCA1, I could potentially save my 3 daughters. I have 3 daughters and 1 son. If not from having BRCA1, at least being aware and hopefully avoiding getting cancer. So for that, I clung to that, because I realized that my suffering might save them from a lot. And I always felt that God was going to use me in some way when I was finished, because I was lucky enough to have great health insurance, a good support network, friends to help me with my 12-year-old daughter, because my older children were in college. So, and a lot of women don't have that. So I decided I would be of use after I was finished. And then I finished, and as typical, what's typical of me again is to have expectations of myself. So I thought that I would bounce back and signed up for a 14er hike, which is in Colorado, we have what's called 14ers, which is a hike that takes you up an elevation of 14,000 feet.
Wow.
So yeah, so after a year and a half of active treatment, I thought I would just pop up onto a mountain and to, hike a 14,000 foot elevation. I made it to 11,000 feet before I think my body was so overwhelmed. That was what caused the cellulitis, which landed me in the hospital. So those dashed my dreams of doing a 14er that summer. But my point is, I had expectations of myself physically, emotionally, and spiritually after treatment. I envisioned myself as just kind of going back to who I was before, and didn't take the time to grieve what I'd been through and process what I'd been through. Instead, I beat myself up for not being stronger, faster, for not, feeling happy and grateful, and I fell into a very deep depression. And so that was kind of the beginning of the end. So I got through treatment with a great attitude and a lot of faith, but that was a little shaken after my journey was over, after my active treatment was over. I don't want to say journey.
Yeah, and we talk about that a lot on this program, because, how I look at it is that when you're going through the motions, you're going through it because it's what they told you have to do. You have to go for the surgery, and then you recover, and then you go for the treatments, and you go step by step by step, and it's all laid out for you. You know what to expect. Mm-hmm. And the one thing that you kind of forget about is the emotional part. And because you're so busy doing, you forget to take a step back and heal yourself emotionally.
Absolutely.
And I'm 3 years out, and it's taken me this long to acknowledge what happened and to start seeing when my triggers happen,
Yes.
And it's really, really something that it takes us that long, and there's nothing in place. And that's why I started this podcast, right? There's nothing in place that helps you, through that process, and know that you're not alone, and that everybody's journey is different, but we all go through something very, very similar, and it's all just traumatizing, right? And some people bottle it up, some people scream and shout, and we all have our different versions, but at some point in time you get confronted with it.
Absolutely. And I appreciate that you do something like this as well, because I think women like us need to give a voice to others who have gone through things. My experience was, and it's not society's fault, because I wasn't educated about this before I had cancer, but people see us ring the bell, or they see us with our hair growing back, and they're like, yeah, great, she beat it. And then for me at least, people would say, how are you? I'd say, I'm great, because I was tired of talking about myself. I was tired of being the sick one. I was tired of needing other people's help. So I kept it inside, like you said. And it, before cancer, I had struggled after the death of my mother with, which was a very traumatic event. I began self-medicating with wine, alcohol. I was 29 when my mom died, and that's a whole other story. But I can, before that, I was a normal drinker. And I think it's important to share that, because a lot of people think that we're just sort of born this way or something. But the truth is, and my breast cancer psychologist, she specializes in helping women with breast cancer, has said, yes, oftentimes people who have been through any kind of trauma will turn to self-medicating with whatever it is. Some people it's food, some people it's alcohol, some people it's love, whatever your thing is. Codependency. Mine was alcohol, and it kind of waxed and waned over the years, and I was sober for I don't like to even use the word sober. I say alcohol free for quite a while before I was diagnosed with breast cancer. And it's interesting because I thought, well, I've had cancer. I would never, ever want to drink again because that would be harmful to my health. And the last thing I would ever do after fighting for my life is do something harmful for my health. Well, it turns out that last summer, after going through treatment and falling into this, just what I can just a pit of depression and not knowing who to talk to, how to share that I was miserable, even though I was alive. I did go back to drinking for a brief period of time. And it was really because that was what I knew. When the pain got to be too much, that's what I had done in the past. And I didn't really have the tools to deal with what I needed to deal with, you know, to look at my body and see the loss of my breast, to realize that, okay, I didn't need my reproductive organs anymore. I'd had my 4 children. I was approaching menopause, but still, that's a very hostile way to go into menopause, you know, to have what was your baby's home taken out of your body. And just the whole, and just realizing that, you know, that the old Victoria is gone and there's going to be a new Victoria, and what are we going to do with her? And the point I was at last summer, it was not turning out to be a very good version of myself. You know, the alcohol was making me extremely sick because of all the treatment I'd had. I knew that it was bad for my health. It was putting me in a terrible shame spiral because, you know, like, what kind of crazy person would go through cancer and then drink? Well, turns out a lot of people turn to self-medicating.
Absolutely.
So that was something that I decided I needed to deal with. I went into very intense therapy and did EMDR to kind of process the trauma of losing body parts, of the diagnosis, of the fear of not being around for my children, all of those things. And that had led me to a completely different path in my life, where I am able to help people and give them a voice. Initially, my podcast was going to be about, it's called After the Crisis, and it was going to be about just life after cancer. But then I realized that this is a common theme for anyone who's gone through a crisis. Mine was just external because everyone could see I had cancer. But a lot of people have the internal scars, and they don't know how. They feel like there's a point at which we should be over it. We should be okay. And I think that comes from within, internal expectations, and also society. You know, like, well, she got divorced 3 years ago. She should be over it. Well, maybe she's not, you know, or, you know, whatever, you know, her father passed 6 years ago. She should be over it. Well, maybe she's not, you know, and maybe she's developed some unhealthy patterns to help kind of ease that pain and not really talk about and process what needs to be processed.
Absolutely. And I can't agree more, because part of, I'm listening, and what's resonating in my mind is like, I'm in denial. Now, my background is I spent 20 years in oncology. I'm part of the diagnostic staff, right?
Wow.
And then I got diagnosed and I automatically went denial. Like, I knew exactly what I wanted to do for my treatment. I was telling my oncologist, they're like, "You're being too aggressive, Laura." And I'm like, "No, this is what we're going to do because I've seen what can happen," and blah, blah, blah.
Yes.
And long story short, my test results came back that what I wanted to do is what was standard of care. So I also went through like a bilateral mastectomy, and, you know, and then after everything was done, I was put on tamoxifen, and I was just literally, I'm fine.
Yes.
You know what I mean? Like, I stopped researching. I didn't look anything up. I was just like, I'm good. Like, this is over. It's like,
It's over now.
I couldn't handle continuing on because of the trauma, but also, like, I didn't deal with any of my body confidence, my body image issues. I just pretended like it never happened.
Yes.
Right. And then it got to a point, because part of it too was that, like, well, it's over, Laura. It's okay. Like, get over it. Get beyond it.
Yes.
And I then abruptly, like, quickly learned that unless I do the work and get myself to a better place emotionally, mentally, I was always going to be in that repeat pattern. It was never going to go away.
Right. It doesn't go away. It shows up in different areas.
Mm-hmm.
A friend of mine said recently, I love this quote. She said, if you don't deal with your trauma will deal with you.
Yeah, 100%.
And I thought that is so true. And that's basically what they said. I went to an intensive therapy program, and she said, Victoria, everyone has a trauma tree, and it's not about comparing. I think that's another thing we do. We compare, like, well, my cancer wasn't as bad as hers, or I should be grateful. I only had to have my breast removed. And, and again, I think people do that with trauma. Well, it could have been worse. My family could have been worse. This could have been worse. At least I didn't have a divorce like that person's where they left them, but she said, everyone has a trauma tree, and you have been sort of pruning your trauma tree and clipping off branches and things like that. She goes, you need to go in with a backhoe and uproot it. And you have to look at the roots of it. And so that's what we did. I'm always in the process of discovery and growth, but all of that stuff that came up during cancer was rooted in previous things that I had experienced that I thought if I did the work, I could control the outcome. And so, like you said, the patterns keep showing up and keep showing up. And cancer is just kind of it's like putting a magnifying glass in the sun, on a leaf. It just sort of intensifies whatever stuff you had going on before is going to be magnified. And to your point, unless you deal with it, it's gonna keep you very stuck.
Absolutely. And I'm also a believer that, everything happens for a reason, even though that's cliche. But I know that for me, and it's exactly what you're saying, that your pattern repeats. Like I need to go through massive trauma in order to make a change, right? Like I needed to get through a divorce in order to make a change about the relationships I choose.
Yes.
I needed something big like cancer in order to realize like life is really short, Laura. You're not exempt, and you need to slow down, right?
Yes.
I was in a high stress, very demanding, 10 to 14 hour day position. But that's what I did. It was my life. And like, I thought it was okay because I was working out 6 days a week and I was in the best shape of my life. And like, I was eating all the right things. And I needed like it to hit me on the head and be like, you need to deal with that too. Like you need a work-life balance. You need healthy relationships. And, we all have our version of the pattern, and it all shows up in different ways.
It does.
Yeah. And the other thing too, that's really interesting based on what you said was I was on Facebook in one of those groups, and someone said, I just got diagnosed yesterday. I'm a stage 1, invasive ductal carcinoma is what I got diagnosed with. And I feel guilty. I feel like I should be more advanced, like that I don't have a voice, like I shouldn't even be on here. And like my response to her was literally like, first, language is reality. Let's readjust your language. Right. And second, nobody would ever want you to be more advanced.
Right.
Like anybody who's been in this would never want that for you.
Yeah. I don't take any pleasure in saying, oh, I had the what show of cancer, and I had to have the most no, I wish I'd had a nice stage 1.
Right. And like,
but I hear what you're saying, right? The comparison, like, well, my trauma isn't even worth mentioning.
Yeah. And I'm just like, no, like you're about to go through some stuff regardless of what it looks like for you.
Yes, exactly.
It's still something. Right. And I kind of want people to cut it out. Do you know what I mean? Like,
I agree.
Cut it out. Like
I agree.
We're in it together, and like we need to support each other and like not compare. 100%.
Right. Absolutely. Yes. And I think that was one of the most freeing things for me, was because, as triple negative has a higher mortality rate. And so I would see women on my groups who would not beat it. And of course I would minimize my trauma and say, I'm alive. How dare I feel these things? And I think that's where we get in trouble, when we start to say, how dare I feel this, or I should feel. And so that's, that's how this whole thing became this after the crisis, is just allowing women who have it's been mostly women. I actually have my first male guest coming up this week, but just people sharing what they've been through, whatever it looks like, infertility, divorce, losing a child, career disappointments, and how it's impacted them. And often how they've then, once they've gone through it, really gone through it, how they've began to thrive after the crisis by serving others and by being their authentic selves. So that was kind of the catalyst for my podcast. And it's also been healing for me, because I know that, like you, just giving people a chance to be heard. I think people just want to be heard and know that they're seen and that they matter.
Yeah, absolutely. And you're also involved with, as an integrative nutrition coach, correct?
Yes, I am. Like I said, I have my degree in dietetics, but that was a long time ago. So, quite dated. When I was going through treatment, I decided to keep myself off of researching. I would study something. So I found an online course to become an integrative nutrition coach. And it was a nice fit for me because of my background in dietetics and fitness. So an integrated nutrition coach kind of helps people look at, like you said, a balanced life. We kind of look at the wheel of our life and all the different parts that comprise that circle. And we identify imbalances, like, well, how is your career impacting your relationships? Why are you imbalanced in these different areas? And then we kind of dive in and help make some healthy adjustments, some sustainable changes that people can implement to just have a more balanced and hopefully happy life.
I love that. And you're still accepting new clients, correct?
Yes.
All right, awesome.
Clients, yes.
And so how can people find you?
So I have a website. It is victoriaenglishmartin.com. You can contact me there. You can also find my podcast, After the Crisis, on any of the major platforms. Just look up After the Crisis and you'll see me there. That's
And are you on any social media or Facebook?
I am on social media, same thing. You can look up After the Crisis or Victoria English Martin.
Okay.
I'm on Instagram and Facebook.
Perfect.
If you come onto Facebook, I have a group called After the Crisis, and it's just it's not too big, and it's just a nice area where we kind of have some thought-provoking questions and good conversation, keeping things real, no filters.
I love that.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And then you also have a book coming out soon, right? In a couple months?
In a couple of months, yes. I was very honored. I was asked by best-selling author Anna David. She's been, I think she's authored 8 books and had several New York Times bestsellers. She is publishing a book called The Addiction Diaries. And it's an anthology. It's a compilation of, I think there's about 9 or 10 of us authors, and we are contributing our story. So it's my story about, what caused me to start self-medicating with alcohol back when my mom died, and what that journey looked like before and especially after cancer, and how I finally was able to process all the trauma, not all the trauma, but I'm getting there, process the trauma and not just become alcohol free, but free from alcohol. So, yeah. So
and it's like I say, some days you just need to take it a second at a time.
Mm-hmm.
So, and I truly commend you for everything that you've gone through and for just having the courage, right, to just do the hard work, as I like to call it. It really takes something. It takes a lot of courage. And, thank you for who you are in the world, for your podcast, for writing this book. So many people need to hear from you. And just thank you for taking the time to be here with us.
Oh, gosh, Lori, thanks for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, and I'm so excited to go and find you on Facebook and join your group. So thank you again.
Yes, please do. Okay, thanks for having me, guys.
Right.
Have a great day.
You too.